Who here listens to Canada Reads on CBC Radio 1? I expect almost everyone. Of course, it's wonderful, isn't it? You understand the battle of the books kind of format. Well, Open Book organized something similar for the 25th anniversary. It launched a contest, and readers voted for their favorite Trillium winning title from the past 24 years. Open Book got hundreds of votes, literally, and put together a short list of English and French titles. Then OMDC put together 2 panels, again, English and French, to review those top titles. And tonight, the panels will discuss those books. We're going to begin with 4 panelists on the top 4 English titles, and as I introduce them, I'll ask them to take their seats. Please welcome, first of all, Mark Medley, I should say the newly married Mark Medley, congratulations, editor for the National Post, co-editor of the paper's books blog, The Afterword. Welcome, Mark. Good friend Zaib Sheikh, well-known producer, director, and fabulous actor, the beloved star through 6 seasons of Little Mosque on the Prairie, which we will be missing, but it's great to see you here. Nice to see you. Eleanor Wachtel, host for 22 years of the award-winning program Writers and Company on CBC Radio 1. She also hosts Wachtel on the Arts. I don't need to tell this crowd that, I'm sure. Welcome to you, Eleanor. And also Matt, yes, welcome. Matt Wells, who is the face of much more. Every day he delivers his Matt tracks, which are songs past and present. Hello, hello, hello. Songs that he thinks you should hear, and we're looking forward to hearing him on books tonight. Moderating things for us this evening is one of Canada's most recognized and respected senior research professionals and social commentators. He's the host of a very successful talk show on TVO called, fittingly, Alan Gregg in Conversation. May I just express personal feelings, and probably those of you in the room, we miss him on the panel, at the Ad Issue panel on the National Thursday nights. So we don't get to see him this season on Thursday nights, but we get to see him at work tonight. So please welcome Alan Gregg.
Heather, thank you for those kind words of introduction. As Heather mentioned, that this top favorite list was compiled as a consequence of results of hundreds, thousands of Ontario readers. But at the end of the day, it's these 4 who made the final decision. That decision isn't going to be announced till tomorrow. So we have to be circumspect to the extent that you can't kind of let the cat out of the bag.
I'm not sure we've made the decision yet, to be honest.
You're still fighting?
We're still fighting. We're still fighting.
Very angry over here.
But I would like you to do, I'd like to invite you to introduce the audience to these books and address, what really sets these 4 apart from the other 20 winners over the last quarter century. What makes them deserving to be on this top favorite list? Now, I want to start with you, Mark, and just introduce us to Margaret Atwood's The Robber Bride.
Well, The Robber Bride is a novel that basically tells the story of 3 university friends and their life and how it basically comes into disarray through the actions of another friend or kind of an enemy of theirs named Xenia. And as the novel is told, basically in flashbacks and in the present day, early 1990s Toronto, you learn how Xenia basically shattered, 3 of their lives, 3 of their marriages, and how these women are still coming to terms with the damage she has wrought.
Well, basically, she would come in and steal their man.
Basically, yeah. Spoiler alert.
And,
yeah.
And I remember when I sorry?
I said spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert? The book's almost 20 years old.
I had never read it though.
But we're introducing perhaps someone to it for the first time.
We'll get to both
well,
of these.
I just remember when I interviewed Margaret Atwood in 1993 when the book came out, and she said she was curious. I asked her about, because Xenia is like a femme fatale, she's pretty evil, and I asked her about like why, and she said that she was interested in exploring roles for women, and she had been rereading Medea. And she said, now, which would you rather play, Lady Macbeth or Ophelia? Both of them have mad scenes.
I picked the lady.
Everyone would pick the lady. So it was that kind of character.
This is the peril of interviewing an interviewer.
Just so I can quote the author.
I want to, again, tell us a little bit about Maureen Scott Harris's Drowning Lessons.
Well, I'll tell you a bit about why it's so important on this list, because it is our one book of poetry, a collection of poetry. And so it stands apart not only from in context of what is written in it, because it's a book of poems and not a novel, but it stands apart because it speaks out to, when I thought of the Trillium Award, I always end up thinking about the novels, and the fact that as a finalist, to be able to read a collection of poetry among this, and my father is a poet in the language of Urdu from Pakistan, so I grew up with a fascination for that art. It was really nice to see that, and so I think it stands alone in a way, not only literally, but the fact that it's representing the books, the top four, I think is great.
I want to talk more about poetry in a moment, but Eleanor first, probably the most popular.
Can I just say one other thing?
No, I've got a question that I'm asking.
Well, you know what's interesting is that all three authors are poets.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have only one poetry book amongst the finalists.
Right.
I mean,
but Margaret Atwood and Michael Ondaatje are poets.
But you could argue the two Ondaatje novels are prose poetry in a way. You know, there's not a huge difference between Drowning Lessons, which really does have a narrative bent, especially in that last poetry sequence, The Drowned Boy, which, you know, is almost a story, and some of Ondaatje's work. I mean, I think the line is blurred between those three books. But what I wanted to say is I think the inclusion of Maureen Scott Harris really shows the strength of this award, and shows, you know, I was just kind of going through the booklet. There have been a number of poetry collections that have won the Trillium Book Award. You know, not the Poetry Award, which is a great award, but the overall prize. And just looking at this year's shortlist, there are two fantastic collections among the 6 finalists. And you don't see that almost in any other literary prize in Canada that I can think of.
Good for Trillium, frankly.
Eleanor, talk to us about Ondaatje's The English Patient.
Well, Michael Ondaatje is a poet, and more than that, I think in his prose he's a painter. He paints the most memorable and evocative images, and he's also a romantic, and I find all of that extremely appealing in The English Patient. And it's a beautiful and extraordinary and memorable novel. I mean, he doesn't write conventional fiction. He sets part of the book in this sort of romantic desert love story that could be out of, you know, Casablanca, and then the other, and it crosscuts. I mean, interesting. There are flashbacks in all of the books, of all of the novels, to this this kind of Eden, that's this oasis in Italy, where a kind of refuge where these 4 characters meet, and a tentative kind of healing takes place, or at least, and again, the tentative healing, I'm quoting Ondaatje himself when he talks about The English Patient.
The last top favorite is also an Ondaatje book, his breakout book, In the Skin of the Lion. Matt, introduce us to that.
Here's the thing with Skin of the Lion for me. You know, Ondaatje, of course, is such a poetic author, as we talked about, but even more than The English Patient, this book, in certain aspects, I found myself following an image he was describing, and I almost lost myself and forgot about the plot, because he was describing an image so beautifully that I forgot that he was telling the story. And I was like, oh my God, I gotta catch up with this plot. It was just so beautiful. But then I realized as I get further in the book that as I go back, that these images were so important in telling the story. And that's what I love about what he does, and I found really compelling in this particular book.
Well, the most amazing image, there are 2 actually amazing images in The Skin of a Lion. One is when the nun is falling through the air and is caught in the arm of this the Macedonian laborer, and then the other is when Caravaggio has himself painted blue so that he can escape across the blue roofs. I mean, they're just astonishing.
Mark, to varying degrees, I mean, all 3 of the novels are historic. I mean, is this a coincidence, or is there something compelling about that particular genre that attracts Canadian readers, do you think?
I mean, it's almost a cliche to say Canadian writers show an aptitude with historical fiction, but I mean, I disagree. I don't consider the Robber Bride to be historical fiction at all. It kind of depends when you come to that novel. When it came out in the early 1990s, it wasn't historical fiction at all. There are some sections, sure, that are set in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but for the most part, it's set in pre-gentrified Queen Street West.
For someone who's born in 1981, 1950 is historical, my son.
That's true. That's true. But no, well, I mean, when I came to it, I would consider the Robber Bride historical fiction. But for somebody who lives through those eras, I don't know if you could argue that.
It's so evocative of the Toronto that I know as well. Still live and breathe and walk amongst the campus, where it centers at the University of Toronto. So for me, it's such a great Canadian book because it sort of micros down onto a city, into a cityscape and city people and restaurants and
specific
that
intersections.
Yeah, you really get a sense of the place with her in a contemporary and yet historical context because she gives you the generations, if you will.
I want to ask you further on that, Zay, because while you obviously love books, I mean, your medium is film.
Right.
And The English Patient, not only, much lauded book, but hugely successful movie. Does that make a huge difference in the popularization, the enduring popularity of a book over time?
I mean, I think personally, I felt that what Ondaatje, Mr. Ondaatje, achieved in words is what Mr. Minghella achieved in film. So, but yes, an image of a burning man falling from a plane onto a desert landscape is one of the images that is written, and for me, it's such a cinematic image that the movie just illuminated. But the strength of Michael Ondaatje's work is that for a person who admittedly loves film and cinema, that he transcends not only the written word into what's visual. So when he's describing that first moment of what the nurse does, what Hannah does, and that English patient kind of looks that way to her, you sense the slowness and the scene. You really get a scene from reading a Michael Ondaatje work. So for me, absolutely, if it's cinematic, if it's epic, if it's a once upon a time kind of feel, you got me and you're hooked.
Yeah, well, a couple of things also that Michael Ondaatje said. He starts with an image. He's also loves movies and is not quite a filmmaker manqué, but he's even gone to film. He's made some documentaries. He even went to study film. He says he writes his novels in a way like he just writes and writes and writes, and then he edits almost as if it were a film. And then more in answer to your question about the enduring popularity of a book, after The English Patient was so successful as a movie and won all these Oscars, sales of the novel just skyrocketed, and I think over 1 million copies were sold after the movie came out.
Ray Fiennes on the cover and Juliette Binoche.
What's interesting, what I find interesting,
Kristen Scott Thomas, the beautiful Kristen Scott Thomas.
What I find interesting about Ondaatje, we're using words like cinematics, but the two novels that we're discussing tonight, if you had asked me, in 1992, before The English Patient came out, I would have considered both of them unfilmable. Because they're not, A to B to C traditional narratives. You have jumping, somersaulting through time, multiple points of view. It doesn't scream Hollywood to me.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Minghella took like half the book.
Yeah, true.
And just went with that. So
it's interesting what you just said about that particular book, but all three novels really had that, which was interesting to me. But the three novels that we were looking at, the ones that were voted, the ones that didn't have that kind of formulaic. Three kind of scenes. It was just like back and forth, right. which kept me interested in Robert Bride in particular, what kept me going.
The back and forth.
All of you applauded Trillium for recognizing poetry. Matt, I mean, you a musician, you work with musicians. Many I know value the word even more than the story. But in these kind of competitions, I mean, is poetry always at a disadvantage?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Here's my let me tell you. Here's my issue in general, and I've done a lot of panels when it comes to music and other type of writings. I have always found a struggle with feeling like I am somehow a voice for judging someone's art. It's very difficult for me, and I find it I struggle with it. When it comes to your question and the poetry, yes, it's so different. It's impossible to compare the two, but I will say this. what Atwood and Ondaatje have been able to do in 300, 400 pages, Maureen has been able to do sometimes in half a page. And I tell you what was interesting to me, and I didn't even realize that I did this, was that there's a poem called Early Childhood Education. And long after I had read this, my 6-year-old daughter, she's at this point of her life now where she's really asking a lot of questions. She's struggling. Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to pick this up? And I felt like I'm always kind of saying, you just have to. This is why you have to do it. And I didn't know if I was really explaining it to her. So I remembered this poem where the first couple lines is, the girl must not move suddenly or talk in a loud voice. She must listen, not interrupt or contradict. And I read that. I was like, oh my God. Are you kidding me? So I brought this to my 6-year-old daughter and I told her to read it. And that's what, to me, why music is so inspiring to me, because the best music is the music that makes me want to pick up a guitar, that makes me want to go write a song. And I read these novels, and they're wonderful, but nothing made me feel the way that did and make me go to my daughter and say, read this, I think it might help you. She's 6. And to me, that was a moment that made me realize how wonderful these poems are in that book.
I want all of you to wait into the next question, but I want to start with you, Eleanor, and that you can't help but notice that all 4 of these writers are a particular generation. You know, is Canadian literature at a kind of a best before date now, or is there a whole other generation of great young writers who are ready to shine like Atwood?
First of all, you've just insulted, I don't know how many finalists are present, and you know, Greg will be available afterwards for lynching or something. You know. There is, of course, I mean, starting with David Bezmosgis, who's right here, and the other people who are shortlisted, and Vincent Lam and Sheila Heti, and I mean, and Mark knows more of them, and Madeleine Tien, and I mean, there are a lot of. I wouldn't even say up and coming because they've already up and come, and they've published 2, maybe 3 books. Miriam Taves, sort of middling in between those sort of generations. Mm-hmm. To say best sell by or whatever, no.
Eleanor, it's called a softball with an invitation to hit it out of the park, okay?
I know, but I thought I'd give an invitation for them.
Here's the thing about the list. I mean, discounting Harris, because I don't know her other work as well as the other 2 authors we're talking about. We're talking about Atwood and Ondaatje, 2 writers who, unfortunately, have written more books already than they will write. I mean, they're both approaching the ends of their careers at this point. When Ondaatje wrote In the Skin of a Lion, I think he was in his late 40s. He would have been about 50 years old when The English Patient came out. So it's not like he was young at this point. And I think if you look at somebody like Nino Ricci or Miriam Taves, people who are in their mid-40s right now, there's no reason why 30 years from now, 25 years from now, we won't be discussing them in the same glowing terms that we apply to Ondaatje and Atwood.
I also think, sorry, that it's because we're a young country, and we're a country with so many voices that are really starting to discover themselves in a global context. We get the benefit, and it's that generation. You can already, we're talking about them as established, but look at them. They're women, they're men of diverse backgrounds, there's poets, right? That already is, frankly, it's not just a bunch of old white guys writing books. The Trillium has been a part of that because old white guys write good books too. But so does everyone else. So do young white guys, so do young not white guys, so do women. And I think that's what Canada gets to prove on the world stage as a literary sort of nation, is that we are a refuge for a lot of voices, and those voices are young.
Matt, you want to weigh in on this at all?
I would say this. When you take any piece of art, specifically a novel and music, I would say, sometimes, depending on when they reach their peak or the peak of popularity, they remind you of a certain time. They remind you of a time when you read it. And again, I go back to this idea that this type of coming together of people to vote on what might be the best of all time, I think it really comes down to we're voting on what people remembered the most, what kind of made them feel the most. And it's really important for me to, at least from my perspective, to say, when you have these type of works, it's not about what's the best, but it's what made you feel. And I think that these books just reminded the people who voted of a certain time in their lives. And I think that's what's important. I mean, I could do the same thing and look to so many authors. I mean, my new friend Tony Burgess out here, Claudia Day, who was a Trillium nominee winner in the past. There's so many wonderful writers, and I think that this whole event and to show that what Canada has produced is just a testament to the talent that we have.
I want to talk about the rest of that because, I mean, Cecil B. DeMille said the public is always right. And as a pollster, I can tell you they're not. Are there any titles that are kind of egregiously absent from this list? That if you had your way, Mark, I don't want to go with each of you. If you had your way, it would be...
Alistair MacLeod's No Great Mischief I think is the best kind of Ontario book. That's won the Trillium in the last 25 years. Looking at that list, that's the one that jumps out. And I was shocked, actually, it didn't make tonight's discussion.
Dave?
Timothy Finlay, Stones. I'm surprised that didn't make it because just in that pantheon of literary figures, that was a landmark book as well in his oeuvre, and I was shocked that it wasn't listed.
Eleanor?
Friend of my youth, Alice Munro, and another Alice Munro, Love of a Good Woman, but Friend of My Youth is a particular favorite of mine. And I was very surprised not to find Alice Munro on this list.
Look at you and I having the same taste.
Hey.
Bring it up. Stole my thing. I got nothing to say.
Last question. Trillium Awards. We've seen, over the last, decade, a little over a decade, I mean, a proliferation of these kind of awards. I mean, do these make a real lasting improvement in the lives of writers and in the health of Canadian literature? Is this just kind of a self-indulgent exercise where we're talking to one another?
You heard Ann Michaels say it in the video we just watched. Anything that brings attention to books, helps sales, is a benefit to the industry and the writing community. I think an exercise like the one we're doing tonight, I don't know how many extra copies of the Ondaatje and Atwood novels are going to be sold because, they've already sold a gazillion copies. But I would assume Drowning Lessons is going to get a little bit of a boost. And I mean, it's great that a poetry collection that probably sold maybe 1,000 copies is getting, a renewed lease on life. So it's definitely a good thing.
I think it's important to, again, go back to the youth of the country and the fact that it is important to celebrate the great works and the great voices, to continue to perpetuate that they are worthy of being recognized. Because if you don't recognize your own, then how will the world recognize it? And it starts with that pride and that humility of saying, this is great, and this is why we'd like to hopefully this will represent something. And the more the people that actually get out there and support our homegrown material, the better we all are as a country for it.
Eleanor, you've probably seen this up close, the effect, more than anyone in this panel.
I'm not sure about that, but I would just echo the testimony of the authors in the video, and including Maureen Scott Harris, who said that the recognition and validation was so important, and other writers who just said they just write and write. It's such a private thing and lonely thing often. I mean, authors do talk about that, writing, and then to have something like the Trillium, and as we've been saying, something as broad-based as the Trillium, acknowledging poetry and as well as fiction and nonfiction. Modris Eckstein's was one of the early winners for The Rites of Spring, which was a wonderful nonfiction book. So I think having that breadth is important as well.
Last word, Matt.
Writing is such an invisible art. It's crazy. Someone will kind of disappear for however long it takes them to write whatever they're making, and then they come back, and it's out, and then they disappear again. And what I would look to Drowning Lessons as probably the one that I'm most excited to talk about and let people know about, because coming from the world that I do, which is a guy who spent months and years in a van in a punk rock band going across this country, I know how hard it is to get the attention of anybody making any type of art in this country. It's not easy. So just to have a forum where we can have a discussion, no matter who may or may not be the winner, just to kind of create that conversation about it and create more awareness is a beautiful thing.
The tyranny of time is upon us. I know everyone here wants to hear the 2012 Trillium nominees read. So on behalf of everyone, Mark Medley, Zabe Sheikh, Eleanor Wachtel, and Matt Wells, I want to thank you all very much for joining me. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.